Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo and cryptids encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by you/Cynichappy, so credits to him. The Singing Skinwalker. This story was told to me by one of my good friends, who's of Navajo descent on her father's side. It happened several years ago, when she was spending the last 2 weeks of summer visiting relatives on a reservation in New Mexico, and is by far one of the creepiest things I've ever heard. My friend, Jessie, was 12 at the time and playing outside with her cousins. They were tossing a frisbee around, and one of the younger kids threw it too hard. It flew over the fence and was swallowed up by a small grove of parched Bur Oak Trees. Jessie, being the eldest, went to retrieve it, leaving her 11-year-old cousin Ellie in charge until she got back. The sun was setting, lighting up the sky in brilliant shades of orange, as Jessie made her way over to the grove. After some poking around, she found the frisbee caught in one of the tree's branches. As she climbed, she began to sing an old Navajo song, but paused when her body suddenly went cold. That's exactly how Jessie described it to me, cold, as if she'd been dunked in ice water. You know that annoying scary story cliché of feeling like you're being watched? Well, it's only cliché because it's true. Jessie could feel a pair of eyes following her even when she looked around her and saw nothing. Seriously creeped out, she grabbed the frisbee and ran back to her grandmother's house, just in time to see the old woman step onto the porch and call for the kids to come inside. The true horror didn't start until several hours later. Jessie, her cousin Ellie, and Ellie's little sister Clara were asleep in their grandmother's guest room when Jessie woke up to the strangest sound she'd ever heard. She described it to me as a cross between radio static and the noise an old movie reel makes. At first, it sounded distant, but after a minute or two, Jessie realized it was getting closer. Beside her, Ellie rolled over and muttered, "What is that?" "Don't know," Jessie whispered. The girls waited, holding their collective breath. By now, the sound was right outside the window, and Jessie realized it was singing. At this point in her retelling of the story, Jessie went white and began glancing over her shoulder. She told me the song was the exact same one she'd been singing in the tree grove earlier. It sounded so wrong, she said, rubbing her arms as if a cold breeze had rushed by her. Remember when we listened to that clip of the very first recording of a human voice? How weird it sounded. When I nodded, Jessie added, "It was like that, but a little clearer." Somehow, that made it even worse. Jessie and Ellie were both terrified, while Clara, unaware, slept on. Through the thin blue curtain over the window, they could see the dark shadow of something peering in at them. To this day, Jessie can't explain what motivated her to get up and see for herself, since she was scared shitless. Ignoring Ellie's protests, she slid out of bed and walked across the room on shaky legs. As soon as she drew back the curtain, she regretted her decision. Staring back at her was the most horrifying creature she had ever seen. It had the head of an emaciated deer, with antlers like dead tree branches and eyes so black they seemed to absorb the faint silver moonlight. It had a scrawny humanoid body with abnormally long arms and legs, and as Jessie stood there, caught in its hideous gaze, it raised a clawed hand and scratched at the window with a horrible screeching sound that made Jessie's skin crawl. It was Ellie's scream that jolted Jessie out of her terrified stupor. She stumbled back from the window and landed on the carpeted floor. Clara woke up and began screaming too. Then their grandmother ran in and turned on the light. The thing at the window had vanished, leaving behind 3 long scratches in the glass and 3 terrified little girls. Jessie's grandmother managed to calm the hysterical children enough so they could tell her what had happened. As she listened, her age-weathered face became progressively paler. She hustled the girls downstairs to the living room and made up a bed for them on the couch. She then sat by them all night, and whenever one of them asked her what was going on, the old woman simply shook her head. Needless to say, Jessie and her cousins didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, Jessie's grandmother announced that everyone was to stay inside that day, no arguments. She looked so shaken nobody dared protest. Around noon, she called for a medicine woman to come and bless the house. Later, after the woman left, Jessie marched into the kitchen where her grandmother was loading the dishwasher. "Tell me what that thing was," she said bluntly. Her grandmother sighed and motioned for Jessie to sit down. "You have heard the legend of the skinwalkers, yes?" Jessie frowned and nodded, vaguely recalling the story. "So that was a skinwalker?" Her grandmother nodded. "Yes. Grandma," said Jessie as a light dawned, "I think it overheard me singing in the tree grove yesterday." Her grandmother's dark eyes narrowed. "Why do you say that?" "Because it was singing that same song. You know, the lullaby you used to sing to me when I was little." Her grandmother was silent for a long time before whispering, "You are a very lucky girl, Jessica, but luck has its limits. From now on, you must be more careful." The look in the old woman's eyes as she spoke those words still haunts Jessie to this day. As I said earlier, that was years ago, 7, to be specific. Jessie has returned to the reservation many times, each without incident, but she has never set foot in that tree grove again, and probably never will. Jessie's grandmother died this past March, at the age of 87, and Jessie later moved in with her aunt for the summer so she could help clean up the old house, which the family was going to rent out. She had been there for about a week when I went down there to visit her. On my first night, we sat on the porch and drank some beers, and I found my eyes drifting towards the tree grove. "So that's where it all happened." Jessie shuddered and nodded. "Yep. Tomorrow, I'm taking you to the medicine woman and have her bless you." "Is that really necessary?" The look Jessie gave me nearly turned me to stone. "You think nothing will happen to you because you're white. But when you're in Navajo territory, you're in Skinwalker territory. Take caution." I nodded. "Yes." That night, I swore I heard radio static outside the house. When I brought it up to Jessie the next morning, she didn't speak, but grabbed my arm and practically dragged me to the medicine woman, where I was blessed. Nothing happened for the rest of the trip, and I went back to the city unscathed. I didn't post this here with the intention of teaching a moral, but I suppose if there is something to be learned from the story of the singing skinwalker, it's that there are things out there we can't explain. The look in Jessie's eyes when she recounted her experience told me everything I need to know. What she saw truly horrified her, and all I can say is, I'm grateful I didn't have to go through it myself. Second story. This story was shared by you/Snake973, so credits to him. The Thing in the Fields. When I was young, I lived on a farm in rural Oregon with my parents. I was the only child. We weren't a big commercial farm. Just a family type thing. We had 5 cows, 3 horses, a small herd of goats, 2 dogs, and 1 chicken coop. We also had some Indian runner ducks we kept mostly as pets. We didn't really make any money off the place, just enough to sustain the animals and a little extra for ourselves. Money enough to take a decent vacation every couple of years. Dad had his other job in town, an insurance agent. He was the only one around really, the town wasn't more than about 1,500 people. Mom gave horse riding lessons as well. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. It was really an easy life, or at least it could have been a lot worse. I went to school, Dad went to work, Mom took care of the animals, then we all had dinner together every night, and I would go to bed while Mom and Dad had a beer or two and watched the news. Sometimes at night I would hear things outside. Mostly just normal stuff. The cows or horses would get spooked by a coyote or something, or I would hear the dogs chasing a rabbit, barking their heads off. Every once in a great while we would find a chicken dead. Dad would always tell me about it but never let me see the body, although I asked frequently. He would keep Mom and I inside until he had gone out, did whatever he did with the body, throw sawdust over any blood, and then life would go on as normal. I assumed it was foxes, as I had seen a couple of them out in the pasture over the years, slinking around back and forth through the grass. The summer when I was 10 years old, I remember helping Mom change the bedding in the horse stalls, when we heard a huge racket going on outside. If you've never heard the sounds of a horse in pain, you don't want to, trust me. It sounds almost like a person screaming. Well, that's what we heard, and one of our horses, the Palomino, came running into the barn with a wound on its left thigh. For long marks, like claw marks, ran across its body for about a foot. It had blood running down its leg, and was limping. I was so scared by the sight of that much blood that Mom locked the horse in a stall and made me go inside with one of the dogs. She told me to lock the door and stay inside until she came in to get me. I did. Eventually Mom came inside and told me that the horse had hurt itself on the barbed wire that ran the perimeter of the pasture. We owned more land beyond that, but it was mostly forested. I guess I believed her at the time, but at dinner that night I noticed Dad was being particularly quiet and Mom was talking a lot more than she normally did. She was being really animated, and I noticed that Dad had gotten his rifle out and set it by the back door. Usually he only did that when the coyotes had been acting up. That night I went to bed as normal, but I had trouble falling asleep. I turned on my desk lamp and decided to read comic books until I got tired. I have a very vivid memory of reading Uncanny X-Men and hearing the back door open. Looking out, I could see my dad by the porch light, lighting a cigarette and holding his rifle under his arm. He started walking over to the driveway and then turned to follow the fence line. I couldn't sleep until I knew Dad was back safe. I kept coming downstairs with the excuse of getting water to see if Dad was back in the house yet, and each time all I saw was Mom sitting on the couch in the living room, staring at a blank TV screen and looking worried, sighing occasionally. Eventually, about 4 in the morning, I think, Dad did come back, and I was so tired and relieved that I fell asleep as soon as I knew he was home. He never told me what he did that night, but I never thought to ask. 2 months later I was back in school. It rains a lot in Oregon in the fall, and this day was no different. All I could hear from my bedroom was rain hitting the ground and the aluminum roof of the chicken coop. There was light thunder in the distance, but it was slowly getting closer. I thought I had heard a coyote yapping out around the garage, or it could have been one of the dogs. I looked out, straining my eyes to see whatever there may have been. In a brief and distant lightning flash I saw something. It looked almost like a person, but hunched over, and with a long torso. It was tall, taller than Dad, who was a good 6'4", at least. I just barely caught a glimpse of it on the near side of the garage, then the light faded and I didn't see it again that night. There was another dead chicken the next morning. The third in just as many weeks. I told Dad what I had seen the previous night. The color went out of his cheeks momentarily, until he told that the storm must have been playing tricks on me. I accepted that. For months after that we lost a cow. It was in the middle of the night, and we all woke up at the same time. There was a lot of noise in the pasture, but only briefly. The cry of a dying animal, and a primitive, guttural yell that I had never heard before. Dad rushed up to my room. I could hear him running up the stairs to my room. He had his rifle in hand, and opened my door. He saw I was awake and told me to stay inside no matter what and try to go back to sleep. I don't think I have to say that sleep wasn't really an option any longer, but I did stay in my room, with a blanket held tight around my shoulders and staring out the window. Probably about 10 minutes later I heard gunshots in the field. I don't know what he was shooting at, whether it was whatever had attacked the cow, or the cow itself, trying to put the animal out of its misery. Dad rarely, if ever, talked about that night. I later found out that he had gotten to the cow only to find it ripped open on the ground, bleeding out from its torso. The shots I heard were him shooting the cow in the head. It kept going like that. For years. A chicken or a duck here and there. Something bigger only very rarely. It sounds absurd, but I almost came to think of it as commonplace. I only ever caught glimpses of the thing until what comes next. It terrified me. It happened in the middle of the day, over the course of a long weekend when my parents had gone to Seattle to see my uncle, who was ill. It was on a Saturday afternoon. I was 17 years old. I was out in the barn putting out food for the horses and the dogs. The horses were running around out in the pasture and the dogs were asleep in the corner of one of the horse stalls. I heard something rustling in the tall grass outside in the pasture. The dogs looked around a little bit but didn't seem to mind. I assumed it was just one of the horses waiting for me to leave so they could eat. I kept going about what I was doing, and in several minutes I thought I heard breathing. I turned to look and it was standing in the door. Tall as hell, even hunched over. The sun was streaming in behind it, lighting up all the dust in the air around it like some kind of sickly halo. It was looking at me. Considering me. Maybe it was trying to decide whether or not I was food. I remember swearing, turning, and running as fast as I could for the house, not even thinking. Panic causing my legs to move. It was behind me, not even breathing hard. I heard its feet hitting the ground in a constant rhythm. I got to the house, opened the door, slammed it behind me and locked it as fast as I could. I tore through the house, locking every door, and drawing the blinds on every window. I could hear it snarling outside the back door. The dogs were barking at it, but they wouldn't try to attack the thing. It was too big and they knew it. It roared at the dogs and they ran off, probably to hide in the pasture. I went to my parents' bedroom and got Dad's rifle. I loaded it, set up a chair in the living room facing the back door, and waited. It started prowling around the house. I could hear its feet crunching on the gravel of the driveway and the wooden planks of the back deck. It kept walking, back and forth. I thought about trying to look through a window to see it, but I was too scared. Eventually, after hours of hoping it would go away, the sun went down. I turned on all of the outside lights and went up to my room. I opened my window, with the rifle in my hands, hoping to be able to pick the thing off from above. I saw it lurking just beyond the glow from the porch light. It had long, sinewy arms, and walked on bent knee. It was by the chicken coop. Then it disappeared from view. I heard the chicken squawking and screeching. The thing reappeared with a dead, bloody chicken in its hands. It bit off one of the wings with jaws that were dripping with slime and drool and let the dead bird drop to the ground at its feet. Then it looked at me. Its eyes made contact with my eyes. It turned away again, back to the chickens. It came back with another bird, mutilated it in front of me, and dropped it. It went back again. And again. I should have taken a shot at it, but I was astounded and confused trying to figure out what it was doing. Then it hit me, it was a show of power. It was showing me that it was stronger than me. That it could do whatever it wanted to do because I couldn't stop it. At the same time I felt powerless and sickened. Powerless because what it was saying was true. If it was just that thing in me, I wouldn't stand a chance. Sickened because I realized what kind of intelligence it would need to be able to convey that message. The thought shook me out of my stupor and I remembered the rifle at my side. It was heading back to the chickens, and I decided that when it came back I would take my shot. It strode back to the porch. Almost arrogant, walking on bended knee with those arms so long that the chicken was nearly dragging on the ground. I raised the rifle up to my eye, and tried to steady myself. My heart was beating so hard I could see the rifle shaking ever so slightly in rhythm with each heartbeat I could hear pounding in my own ears. It raised the body to its mouth and just as it was about to put the chicken's head inside, I squeezed the trigger. The crack of the gun echoed in the now shattered quiet of the nighttime standoff and I heard it howl. A painful, loud, startled howl. I had hit it on the outside of the shoulder. It ran off into the night. I never saw it again. It was still out there, though. It still killed chickens, and other things. More often than before. I'm writing all of this now because my parents died 3 weeks ago. They were killed in a collision with a drunk driver. He survived. They left me the farm, and I intend to live here with my own family. I'm 32 now, and I work for an Oregon Fish and Game office in Salem. I'm married to a wonderful woman named Stephanie. We have one son, Zachary, who is 4 years old. We are expecting a daughter in 4 months. I've come to the farmhouse alone today. I told Steph that I just wanted some time alone in my parents' house. To deal with some emotions. She was very understanding. I've come back to claim what is rightfully mine. I have Dad's rifle next to me on the table and it is almost dusk. I've also brought several portable halogen lights to set up around the house, and my own shotgun. I'm borrowing a handgun from Joe, a guy at Fish and Game who I work with. When I am done typing this account of my memories, I will print it out, and leave it on the dining room table, along with my wedding ring and my key to the safe deposit box where my will is kept. Everything is loaded and ready. Hopefully I will return here to collect these things and nobody will ever know I wrote this. Steph, in the event that you are the unfortunate soul to find this, which I'm terrified to think seems a likely outcome, the thought of you having to go on alone hurts me more than anything in this world ever can. Know that I love you more than anything and I hope you understand that I am doing this to keep you safe. Zachary, I love you and can only hope you grow up to be a good, kind-hearted, and strong man like your grandfather was. To my unborn daughter, if I don't live long enough to meet you, it will be the single greatest regret of my life. Tell the police, tell Fish and Game, call Joe, he's one of the few people who knows about this. Make this situation known. Eventually someone will kill it, even if it isn't me. Goodbye for now. Third story. This story was shared by you/Merbeefthighs, so credits to him. Don't think you need to be in the countryside to run into a cryptid. There are monsters in the city too. People always talk about the number of monsters that reside in our country's vast tracts of uninhabitable land, the dense forests, deep caves, and the remote mountaintops, and the danger these creatures present to us. They're right to warn you, especially about the areas around our national parks, but did you ever stop to think about why the vast majority of people that go missing are last seen in some of our largest cities? For every one person that goes missing in the American wilderness, 3 vanish in our cities. Granted, Some of these disappearances, on both sides, can be contributed to murders, accidents, kidnappings or runaways, but a growing number each year can be contributed to those things that live in the shadows, and it's getting worse, especially in our cities. Ask any homeless person on the street. They'll tell you. 99.99% of the people they tell will write them off as crazy, or under the influence, but I promise you they aren't lying. They saw a huge, sticky tongue latch onto a woman and pull her into a dumpster. So have I. They saw a little girl lure a man into an alleyway before pulling his arm off and lapping up the puddle of blood. Not crazy, I've seen that too. A living shadow that envelopes its victims in a suffocating black slime. I haven't seen that one, but I know a guy who did and I believe him. These things are all around us and you'll do well to listen to my story and take heed. This could save your life. A girl had gone missing, young, blonde, blue eyes, the kind that gets her face all over the news when they go missing. Her name was Amelia Meager. I'm sure the entire city had her name and face memorized by the time my story started. Seems like it was all they played on the news for a week. About a week after Amelia's disappearance, I was walking home from the bars drunk and cursing myself for not being able to close with the girl I was talking to when a voice called out to me. Normally, I wouldn't have paid any attention, not too many people you want to hang out with are on the streets after 2 a.m., but this was a woman's voice. Being the horny, young guy that I was at the time, I came to a screeching halt and turned in the direction the voice called from. The voice originated from a dark shadow beneath a highway overpass bridge. Hello. I called into the darkness, my eyes straining to pick up in shapes moving around in the inky black. Can you help me? The voice called back from somewhere in the darkness. I think I'm lost. Something about the voice was strange, the cadence was slightly off, like whoever was speaking was reading lines and didn't fully understand what they were saying. It reminded me students reciting lines in Spanish class back in school. I still couldn't pinpoint where exactly the voice was coming from as it reverberated between the buildings and the overpass above. Where are you? I said to the darkness still standing just outside the shadow of the overpass. I can't see you. I heard movement from within the shadow. Not footsteps, but something dragging along the ground. I'm here, the darkness said, closer now. I fixed my eyes on the source of the voice, and as my eyes adjusted, a figure came into focus. Just faintly through the darkness I could make out a dirty white sundress. The ethereal glow of the fabric created a stark contrast against the darkness that enveloped her and made her facial features that much harder to see. I still can't see you, I strained my eyes, squinting into the dark. Come out into the light. I watched the outline of the sundress move. It seemed to glide through the air slowly. I heard no footsteps, and I didn't hear the dragging noise either. It came to a stop about 4 feet from its original position, still sequestered well within the shadow, but I could now see a little more. In the dim light, I could see the blonde hair and blue eyes of Amelia Meager. She was bruised and bloody, scabs dotted her face, arms and legs. A look of crazed terror filled her eyes, like she was trying with all of her willpower to scream but she couldn't. Amelia? I asked, sobering up quickly, are you Amelia? I took a step towards her. Please, help me, Amelia said, as she abruptly reached a hand out in my direction. I took a step back this time. Something wasn't right about her. The extending of her hand was too jerky and choreographed, and her mouth when she spoke was downright unnatural. Her jaw moved up and down in a chomping motion, but her lips never moved. It was like watched a dubbed-over foreign film. Nothing about this situation felt right at all, but I had to do something. This was Amelia Meager. the girl who had been all over the news for the last 5 days. I recognized her right away. I couldn't just leave her there. I had seen her family on television crying. I took another step towards her and reached my hand into the shadow to grab onto her extended hand, when suddenly, a car drove by. The headlights illuminated her for half a second just as I was about to grab her. She wasn't standing, her bare feet hung pointed to the ground, her chipped toenails dragging along the cement. She had fine, barely perceptible threads intricately wrapped around her joints, her knees, wrists, elbows and shoulders. A few other fine silky threads were attached on both sides of her jaw and both sides of her head. Her eyes were screaming at me. I've never in my life seen anyone look so helpless. In that half-second of light, my eyes followed the thin strands of silk that attached to her joints to their origin on the ceiling the overpass made above us. Barely visible, a giant, hulking spider pressed up against the overpass, each of its 8 legs manipulated a strand of silk controlling their marionette below. I took 2 steps back out of the shadow staring at the massive creature. I watched it twitch its legs and my eyes darted back down to Amelia as she was dragged back into the darkness under the bridge to be used as bait for the next guy unlucky enough to walk this direction. I left her there and I ran straight home. Amelia Meager was never seen again. I've seen a lot of weird shit in this city over the years and stuff like that seems to be happening more and more often. I said all of this to say, don't think you have to be out in the countryside to run into a monster. They are everywhere. Sometimes they even look just like you and me. You probably walk by a few of them every week without knowing. So, keep your head on your shoulders and don't do anything stupid unless you want to spend your last few days being used as bait like Amelia, or maybe even worse. This story was shared by you/boy with a loaf of bread, so credits to him. All the urban legends about me are wrong. Throughout all of human history, there has been one constant throughout the variables of civilization's advancement: stories. As mankind moved away from small clay huts to monolithic steel skyscrapers, the yearning to tell and listen to stories has always persisted. It's a way of not only growing and evolving the mind, it's a way of connecting with one another. Yet out of all the methods of storytelling that have evolved from the small carvings of stick figures along Neolithic walls, there's one in particular that seems to strike a nerve more than any other: legends of horror. From the very moment you learn to tuck your children into bed, or gather around in communion by a fire, stories of dark and terrifying creatures have invaded your nightmares through the catalyst of scary stories. Many of these classics have become so immovable in human culture, that they've transformed from mere tales of horror to urban legends. Out of the plethora of dark tales told in the night, there's one that holds a certain interest close to my heart. The tales of a mysterious interloper that plays a mesmerizing tune from his pipe to lure unsuspecting children to their doom in the forest brings a certain interest to me, not because of how it can scare the shit out of a misfit to try and get them to behave, it's because it's about me. Yes, I know what you must be thinking. What is this guy talking about? Well, just let me explain. First of all, for those of you who are unaware of the tale of the Pied Piper, let me give you a small rundown. Originating from Germany, the legend tells of a town overrun with rats. The rodents feast on the town's produce and spread death and disease. Eventually the town tries to hire a mysterious rat wrangler out of desperation. The wrangler plays his magic pipe, causing all the rats of the town to drown themselves in the sewers and wells of the town. Upon receiving no payment for his services, the piper begins to play a tune late at night, causing all the children of the town to get out of bed and head for the river. It is then that one by one, each child walks into said river, drowning themselves. Pretty fucked up, right? That's because it's wrong. The legends have been misconstrued through a game of urban telephone lasting generations. Well, that's why I'm here, to set the record straight. So here we go. The Legend of the Pied Piper, written by yours truly. Once upon a time in the mystical land of Germany, there lived a being of the earth. This being was strong and intelligent and had just as many hopes and aspirations as man. Yet he was not of man. He knew many things about himself, except from that of where he came from. The being spent many long years in the forests, educating himself about the world around him as well as its inhabitants. During the day he would spend time with his friends, who were the fellow inhabitants of the forest floor. At night he would take his musical pipe fashioned from the pine of the trees around him, and play. Music was like a drug for the piper. He knew many songs, of which he would play a new tune every night. Once every so often, the piper would play one song through his instrument he knew all too well. The Song of Hunger. Unlike the rest, this song would reach far and wide in the land around him, yet only one other would ever hear it. This other would be a child. Just one, no more, no less. As the music would play, the child would go off wandering away from home, into the forest. Almost every encounter between the children and the piper would be the same. The entranced child would walk into the woods smiling a cleaning smile as they came to the source of the wonderful tune. They would look up and see the piper perched along one of the tree branches up above. "Are you the one who plays such lovely music?" the child would ask. It would be then that the music would stop. Almost immediately after silence returned to the forest, the child would look around in complete adolescent confusion. Having absolutely no idea where they were, or how they got there, they would look up at the piper and ask how to get home. Home. The piper would ask, hopping down from his tree branch, "My sweet delectable child, you are not going home." For a short time afterward the piper approached the child. The quiet forest would be filled with the screams of pain and anguish as the child would be feasted upon by the piper. Tendon by tendon, limb by limb, bone by bone, the piper would consume and leave nothing to waste. But out of everything consumed, the fear and pain of the child would fill the pipe's belly more than anything. It would strengthen his essence with every scream and cry for mercy, to which there would be none. Once the meal was finished, the piper would dig far below for a short while and sleep. Every so often he would awaken for a season and play music, engage with his friends of the forest, and consume a meal. Then he would return back to the ground for another short while to sleep once again. On one particular awakening, however, he was not greeted to surrounding trees as he crept forth from the ground, but by houses and streets of stone. The wonderful forest he had known all his life had become the town of Hamelin. The piper was disgusted by what man had done to his home. However, peering through his anger was curiosity. He would roam the streets of Hamelin, seeing its many inhabitants while also searching for any remnants of his old home. Eventually he came to the river of Hamelin and was filled with delight. The same water that had run through the forest floor still flowed through the ground surrounding the town. But all of this adventuring had done the piper in, his belly was grumbling. He was hungry. But the piper knew he could not walk into the town of Hamelin and take a child just because of his appetite. That was rude. And while man may have been rude, he was not. But he was angry. Angry at the perversion that man had done to his home. So as he sat on the outer banks behind the town of Hamelin in the dark of the night, he smiled as a plan arose in his mind. That next morning, dawn arose over a Hamelin under siege by hordes of rats. The rodents themselves had arrived by another one of the piper's talented songs. Day by day for weeks the people of Hamelin would try to stomp and smash all the rats, but to no avail. All hope for the little town had seemed lost, until one day the piper came strolling through the streets to the mayor's home. The mayor was weary and tired from the troubling invasion of rats, but was overjoyed when the piper offered a solution. "For sufficient payment, I shall find your streets of the rodent infestation," the piper said with a smile. "Oh, but of course. Anything for someone who could save our troubled town," exclaimed the mayor. That day the piper walked out onto the streets of Hamelin and played another tune on his pipe. The music carried over all of the rats of the town as they safely evacuated the town just as they had appeared. The townspeople rejoiced and clapped as their filthy streets were clean of rodents once again. Upon the completion of his work, the piper returned to the mayor for adequate compensation for his work. "How much coin for your service?" asked the mayor of Hamelin. "None," replied the piper. For a moment the mayor was confused, until the piper continued. "I only ask for your child," the piper said with a smile on his face and a deeper grumbling in his belly. With a face of rage and disgust, the mayor threw the piper out of his home, as the people of Hamelin beat and bruised him till he left their town. It was here that the piper had been changed forever. For the first time in his entire life, he looked back at the distant town of Hamelin, with revenge in his eyes. That night, the piper's song of hunger filled the air of Hamelin and lifted each dreaming child of the town out of their bed. In the midst of twilight, the children murdered their parents in their sleep, the perfect betrayal as repentance for their betrayal of the piper. Covered in blood the children walked down the streets of Hamelin, carried by the soothing song of the piper. As they came to the river outside of the town, one by one the children walked into the river. By dawn, every single child of the town floated in the bloody river of Hamelin, except for one. The son of the mayor, the piper's payment. There and then the piper feasted once again, next to the river filled with the true pests of Hamelin. The child's screams carried far in the crisp morning air, yet there was no one left to hear it. With his belly full and the town emptied, the piper dug himself a place in the ground to sleep once again for a short while. And unlike the wretched people of Hamelin, the piper lived happily ever after. There we go, that's a nice story, isn't it? Even nicer that the whole thing is fixed. Of course I hate that it took so many centuries for the director's cut of this story to even come to light, but I've been asleep for so long. And I have to say I am quite impressed with the way the world has progressed in terms of technology and architecture. But I'm quite disgusted by the further perversion of this once green world. But at the end of the day, what can one lonesome piper do in a world so vast and alien to him now? Well, I suppose we'll both find out together now, won't we? Well, I better go on and get off of here. I'm getting hungry, and my pipe has been quiet for long enough. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/Dramantis, so credits to him. I am Hunter. Stop believing in cryptids. As you may know, cryptids have been a hot topic for many centuries at this point, with a recent resurgence in interest especially as of lately. In fact, it may surprise you to know that every single popular post on this subreddit, even the ones you only pretend to believe, is real. Every mythical monster, spectral spirit, and abhorrent aberration you've ever heard of is real. It is the job of my order to hunt down and put these creatures down, but it's becoming worse by the day. And it's all of humanity's fault. I'm not referring to climate change or man-made disasters or anything like that to cause these creatures to become more aggressive or anything like that, but it is, inherently, man's fault. I've been given special permissions to reveal to you all the foundation of my order and a few of the hunts I've been sent on in order to convince the world to stop believing in cryptids. Otherwise we won't last much longer against the tide of the night. I beg of you one and all, read this through to the end, and heed my warning, or all may perish. The order I am a part of was founded in the far-flung past. You all may be familiar with the concept of belief manifesting itself in human life, as it's a common belief for some cultures, but is known to most. Believe that money and fortune will come to your life, and it will, etc. What I'm sure most of you don't know is that this idea has been around for far longer than anyone might think. The founding of my order occurred in the time of ancient Greece and the birth of the Roman Empire, as a group of philosophers had theorized and discovered the power of belief. These philosophers theorized that human belief could manifest many things, from material to immaterial, be it non-living or fully sentient. It mattered not the nature or intelligence of what we manifested, and I suppose in our own way humanity is almost godlike. There was, however, a caveat to our mind manifesting power. The true limit was based on what people believed, and how many believed it. The basic concept would be that for a thing to manifest in the entity that is made real, multiple people would have to believe it having the same characteristics and, or, powers. For instance, the gods themselves. Yes, to answer bluntly, the gods of every single religion to ever exist were, or are, real. Only due to human belief, though. I've met multiple versions of each major religion's god or patriarch god, each with varying degrees of power, but for all they could or couldn't do, they were still never exactly how pictured, or nearly as powerful as the holy texts may describe. In essence, if the world came under one grand religion and there were no differing sects or denominations, and everyone believed this god looked one way, and had these powers, etc., we could manifest an actual all-powerful, all-knowing deity. So now you know the scale of what this power, or curse some might say, humanity can do. Now think of what cultures all around the world have in common. Myths, legends, urban rumors, ghost sightings, and more. Now think of the amount of people who fear and believe these things. Less than the people whose culture it is a part of, for sure, but not an insignificant number. I'm guessing you know where I'm going from here. Cryptids are real, and it's our fault. Don't get me wrong, not all cryptids are malevolent, some are cooperative and benevolent, and some act as prophets for those who know where and what they are. Nessie, for instance, is cooperative, benevolent, and prophetic. We've monitored her for a while now, ever since we found her really. We have done our best to ensure her concealment from the public eye, and she lets us monitor her in the loch, as well as saving people from drowning in it when she can. She hibernates for 1 whole month before the first major chill. She's almost like a reverse groundhog. As soon as she lay her head down and doesn't get up for a day or two, that's our first sign of winter in Scotland. The Mothman is another prophet, and some mistake him for malevolent. That has proven a difficult trial to overcome for our agreement with the Mothman. We have also agreed to conceal his presence from public eye, and in exchange we get a strange kind of feeling and glimpses of images whenever a disaster is about to occur. It's always jarring, even after the first time and knowing what to expect, to get a message from Mothman. I could go on, but you get the idea. Maybe later if you all want I could recount some of the stories from my hunts, but there are 2 in particular I wish to share with you all. It will help to prove my point as to why you should stop believing in cryptids. The Wendigo are creatures of Native American culture, malevolent shades, taking over a human body causing them to go feral and insane, devouring human flesh but never ceasing in their hunger. In myth, they are typically quite pale and emaciated, looking more ghostly than human, but still retaining their humanoid form. I've hunted one such creature before, and it wasn't easy then. And it hasn't gotten any easier. The preparation for this hunt was extensive. We acquired the aid of a medicine man, an older gentleman whose name I couldn't pronounce at the time, so he told me to just call him John, as it would be easier for me. At the time, all we needed were some powerful tranquilizers and the ability to fight the creature until it was subdued. John had described to us the power of the Wendigo, how it could hold even a grown man down and rend the flesh from him with little effort, and while the tranquilizers would weaken it, we'd need at least 3 other strong, well-trained men. I gathered a few other hunters, known as P, the marksman, A, the swordsman, and Theta, the support, and together with myself, equipped with a spear, and John, bringing his trusty shotgun, we ventured into the territory suspected to belong to the Wendigo. The medicine man was exceptional at tracking down the Wendigo by some sort of scent I later learned how to pick up myself, the unmistakable scent of a vile curse. I won't even attempt to tell you the smell a curse gives off, as I can hardly describe it myself, but for those who know how to trace and track a curse, you know the scent. We trudged through the forest as quietly as we could, though John was as a specter, seeming to hover above the ground in his quietness. He made no audible noise, and he seemed to glide through the wood with relative ease. The rest of us were accustomed to the hunt and stalking our prey, but couldn't quite move like John, and Theta was the greenest among us, also the loudest. I think that's why he was the one. Halfway into the Wendigo's territory, I took note of Theta's disappearance, as though he had vanished into thin air. I approached John and gave him a small hand signal. We all stopped dead in our tracks. The only trace we had that Theta was ever even there was his revolver lying in the dirt, his medical supplies, and most importantly the sedatives, were gone with him. I muttered curses and spat vile words under my breath at the creature we hunted, but took solace in the fact that it would soon be dead. We moved more carefully in the darkness of the undergrowth, John having a flare at the ready at all times since the disappearance of Theta. Wendigos have an aversion, a weakness, to fire, he told me, but they can be harmed by most means. Fear not, and keep your wits about you. John continued to glide across the forest floor towards the scent of the curse, but even those of us not well versed could smell decay and death on the wind. We were almost certainly approaching the creature's lair. The ground around the cave mouth that served as the creature's lair was saturated with blood, old and new, and took on a frigid, damp quality. Even the air seemed to almost freeze around the creature's lair. Without a word, we all understood that this was the creature's home, where it had brought Theta, and that it would also become its tomb. We all made sure our preparations were absolute before entering the cave mouth. John made sure he had a shell racked, P made sure he had a round in the chamber of his rifle, A and checked our weapons, to see they were sharp and ready. We could hear a ghastly mix howling and almost hissing noises coming from deep within the cave as we made our approach, and John handed us each a flare. With the loss of our sedatives, our new plan was to blind and frighten the creature into confusion, and subdue it with bullet and blade in its panicked and less cunning state. As we made our way deeper into the cave, and the noises made by the creature became louder and more blood-chilling, as the stench of rot and death almost became overwhelming, John turned back and nodded to us all. We popped the flares. We rushed our way into the antechamber of the cave, the Wendigo's lair, and it stared up at us in surprise, startled away from its never-satisfying meal, the latest victim of the Wendigo, Theta. He was mangled, bones broken, marrow eaten, and a visage of pure terror and endless sadness stuck on his face in death. His chest had been torn open as the creature had been devouring everything inside and outside of him. Seeing the state of our comrade pushed us onward into the fight with vigor and veracity. The Wendigo shrank away from the approach of the fire of the flares, and we fanned out into a semicircle. We all dropped our flares around the Wendigo, encasing it in a cage of fire. P and John nodded to A and myself, and we stepped into the ring of fire, as the former stood without. I approached the Wendigo with the caution and dexterity of a cougar, spear pointed out in front of me and body close and small, while A approached with the strength and confidence of a lion, sword pointed at the Wendigo in a stance that could be offensive or defensive. The Wendigo scuttled slowly back into the corner of our fiery cage, backing up to the cold stone wall as it hissed and snapped at us, but we fanned out and approached from the sides. As soon as the Wendigo had no further ground to give, it was like someone had dropped a match into the gasoline, all hell let loose. P and John fired hatred in the form of lead into the Wendigo, P hitting the Wendigo square in the shoulder as John hit its center mass with 2 slugs. A let fly a swing meant to hack off the monster's arm the rest of the way from its shoulder that P had hit, but it ducked, taking a glancing swipe to the back as it scurried on all fours to A and took out his legs. I had begun charging the creature before A had made his swing, and I reached him in time, stabbing into the creature's ribs as 2 more shots rang out and hit the Wendigo in places I couldn't quite tell, and it howled an awful howl, like a woman in pain mixed with an elk's cry. I had begun recovering his wits and breath as he took his sword and managed to drive it into the Wendigo's shoulder, leaving one of its arms lying limply to the side, and he wrenched it upward, sending the arm sprawling away from its body. The Wendigo tried to claw at A with its good arm and snap at him, ever-hungry jaws yearning for fresh and supple flesh. I yanked my spear out, tearing chunks of rib and rotten flesh with it as I stabbed its arm down to the ground, effectively pinning the creature. I took his sword and stabbed it through the creature's eye, and shoving hard. The arm broke under the force and bent in an unnatural way, as the Wendigo turned to lie flat on its back with its arms still trying to face the way it had been when it was on its stomach. I kept his hands firmly on the sword as the Wendigo struggled weakly against our restraint, and he planted his legs firmly between the creatures. Though not much had been done on our accounts in reality, the creature's frigid aura and the force required to puncture its body and sever its limbs left A and myself more tired than we should have been after only a minute of fighting, and through a few panting breaths A managed to snarl, "We have it pinned, remove the heart and let us be rid of this monstrosity." John came over with some sort of intricately designed knife and pierced the chest of the Wendigo, slicing the blade down its torso and dragging the knife down to its stomach, as he reached in to remove the heart, just about the only thing to still survive the rotting curse of the Wendigo's body other than its bones. "Keep it there," he said, rushing out of the cave. "It may not seem so, but it still lives. Only after I burn its heart will it truly die." And so A and I waited. It was only a few minutes, and we never relented in our restraint of the Wendigo. Thankfully we didn't, as its jet-black eyes became wide when it realized its heart was being burned. It screamed and fought and kicked at A with all the force its broken, battered body could muster. A abetted the kicking of the monster as best he could, and P fired a few rounds into the things to reduce its struggling with his deadly accuracy. After a full 30-second struggle against the thing, it let out one more haunting shriek and fell limp, its jet-black eyes fading into a pure, milky white. This, I assure you, is the more interesting of the 2 tales I have to share with you this night. More recently, the image, power, and strength of a Wendigo has begun to change with popular stories and such. The modern depiction of Wendigo as antlered humanoids with deer skulls, black fur, nigh-impervious bodies, black blood and filling the air with the scent of copper is both inaccurate to most legends, and a pain in the Order's collective ass. There's only one thing we've found that actually works on the damn things that you all fabricated: toxins. Extremely potent toxins, ones that are not only difficult to get a hold of, but difficult to manufacture. P and I were sent on this mission after our success with the original Wendigo. I didn't come along because this time the plan was much simpler, as I had a shield and a small crossbow. Fill the thing with sedatives and neurotoxin until it fatigued itself enough to have its heart burned. The neurotoxin was there to prevent its struggle when we burned its heart. By this point I had learned how to detect a curse upon the wind, and we had tracked the thing deep into a wooded valley in the Appalachians. This thing was faster than the original Wendigo we fought, and truth be told, when we first glimpsed the thing we thought we were dealing with some sort of fucked up Sasquatch, but of course not. The belief around the Wendigo had changed, and so did the creatures we now hunt. P and I had managed to catch the thing running through the tree line ahead of us, and I dashed in front of P to form a vanguard and distract the creature while P filled it with toxins and sedatives. The thing barreled into my shield at almost lightning speeds, and I had no clue what had hit me, but it thrashed around the edges of my shield, trying to get at my delicate vitals and head. I had been prepared for a good amount of force, like the original Wendigo, but this thing almost knocked me onto my back. I howled in pain as it clawed around my shield, weakening my weapon and shield arms, knocking my hand crossbow out of its holster away from me, and almost breaking my shield arm in two with the impact. P stayed calm, and starting firing dart after dart into the creature at suspected vital locations. Most of them plinked off the creature like it was wearing some sort of armor. What the actual fuck is wrong with this thing? I cried out to P, unsure of how long I could withstand the assault. "I don't know," came his reply. "But I have an idea. Hold on for just a little longer, M," and I heard the dull pop of a cork bottle. I pried my weapon arm loose of the creature's grip and reared back for a thrust of my spear, but the spear just barely drew any blood on impact. This seemed to drive the creature into a frenzy, and it began gaining ground on P and shoving me back. I heard an extremely loud gunshot go off as P fired his high-caliber rifle into the thing. The bullet managed to pierce flesh, deeply enough for the creature to feel it and howl in pain. P pulled the bolt as the howling kicked up into a fever pitch and prepared another round, firing into the creature's shoulder this time. I expected it to have weakened the creature like the previous Wendigo, but it seemed to just piss it off even more. P had told me later that he had coated those bullets in the sedative and neurotoxin, and had simply hoped it would be enough. If it hadn't been, we would have both died. I felt the assault begin to lessen against my shield and body, and I tried to drive the creature back, but it was like trying to move a mountain with nothing but a shovel. I did manage to cease its charge forward though, and I jabbed it a few more times with the spear, puncturing deeper into the gash I had already made. "P. Bring me the damn vials." I cried out as I screamed a war cry and continued to jab the creature, running almost purely on adrenaline. P, being the superhuman marksman he is, took stock of the situation and instead, quickly ran to my hand crossbow, attached the uncorked vials via some string to the bolt loaded into the crossbow and fired at the creature. The bolt itself seemed to have no effect on the creature, but I reached up and around the wrathful, unabating claws of the creature and smashed my spearhead against the vials, coating the tip in glistening, painful death. I reared back and shoved the creature one last time before thrusting my spear into the wound I had made deep, thrusting almost center mass deep into the creature and wrenching my spear inside of it. It howled and reared back, swinging full force into my shield as it sent me flying into a tree, stunning me for a few moments. The creature was slowed by the earlier efforts of P, already having sedative and neurotoxin inside it. It tried to clamber towards me, but it seemed that I had hastened the effects by forcing so much toxin so deeply inside of the creature. It charged at me sluggishly, slowing down even before the charge had fully started, and only getting slower as it progressed. It collapsed and tumbled forward a few yards in front of me, and would later find out it died there. No ritual, no burning of the heart, nothing needed to kill it. It oozed black, goopy blood as it lay there dying. Consciousness failed me shortly after it had collapsed, The next thing I remember is waking up in the infirmary at the Order's headquarters in North America, 1 week later. I had, in fact, suffered broken bones and ribs, shock, as well as a concussion that put me into a small coma. My spine still doesn't feel quite right after my encounter with that damnable creature. Shortly after this incident, many other hunters came up missing, confirmed dead, or severely injured by many powerful creatures, more powerful than either their previous counterparts or any cryptid to come before it. I was tasked by the Order to help convince the world to stop believing so strongly in cryptids, or at least to believe in the original myths, and was given special permissions to reveal ourselves in order to do so. And so here I am, recounting to you, one of the strongest gatherings of people who believe in these creatures, my tales, and my orders. I beseech you all, stop believing in cryptids. I'm not sure how much longer we can hold them back. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.